Hi, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this morning's first panel discussion on how are manufacturers coping with shifting supply chains. Recent changes with the China-US trade war and various other aspects have encouraged some companies to move out of China into other parts of Greater Asia and even do some reshoring back to the United States and Europe. This panel is going to discuss the effects of that on electronics manufacturing and whether companies have been taking that opportunity to make their systems smarter and what approach they're taking to that. I'm joined today by Michael Ford on the end here from Aegis Corporation. In the middle we have Ridi Kentilal from Arch Systems. And to my right, we have Gunther Schindler from ASM Assembly Systems. So welcome, panel. Thank you for joining me today. Let's just start with the political question first. What do you think, Michael, the effect has been on the electronics industry of this US-China trade war?
There is really a lot of unknowns. People don't really know how things are going to develop, but they do see what has been a part of this business model all along. I mean, there's always been risk. There's always risk associated with, making things far away. But now we're beginning to see a focus on people thinking, we need to start doing things right. We need to be thinking about the environment. We need to be thinking about our local workforces. We need to be thinking about how best to manufacture locally now. So we're reducing risk, we're reducing cost, and we're able to deliver more timely for the customer. Now, in order to do that, the conversation moves over to smart solutions. So what kind of machines do I need that enable me to bring the flexibility that I need in order to manufacture locally and deliver to customer requirement? So then we look at the new equipment that's available, the new standards for communication, the solutions that bring value to bring that level of control, so that we can take things back, bring manufacturing home under the control of the local manufacturing sites, to be able to produce cheaper and more efficiently and more reliably, saving not only the bottom line on the business, but also a little bit of the element of the planet in so doing.
Yeah. I mean, really, obviously for a manufacturer deciding to relocate to other parts of Asia or the world, it's not a small decision, and it's not something they're going to do and shift it back to China once the trade war is over. This is a big step. Yeah. And when they get there, of course, they've got the whole problem of having to train a new workforce. So is that the opportunity then to sort of put in new software systems and automation into the factory to try and optimize their production?
Yeah, as you mentioned that companies are avoiding having to make decisions until they have to, and their customers are still for contract manufacturers, their customers are still expecting the production to continue. So what we've seen is decisions ultimately having to be made quite quickly. And the training up, there's a lack of there hasn't been trust built with the new facilities, so there is an opportunity and need for machine data to help to be collected, to not just rely on what the line manager would know or what's written on a piece of paper, but have straight from the machine, so that the HQ can see and be able to optimize the operations that way.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Gunther, you're involved in this very much at the rock face because you've been involved in a lot of companies relocating, and you sell a lot of equipment into the cell phone business, for example, which is one of these industries that's right at the forefront. It's one of the first things that happens when a country opens up is they start getting cell phones. So how have you been finding this transition?
On one side, it's quite challenging because you have to start up almost from 0 to 100% in a very short time frame. That means the demand on equipment and also the demand on people who are able basically to be, or who are able to run these kind of equipment are certainly very high. That's what we see. And in that way, I guess it's leveling out. One part is you need to have the standardization, what Michael just mentioned before, because with this you can integrate far easier and you can go forward in a faster track. You also need the data, but you still need also the competencies on the operator side to still work with these equipments in the way that you can produce also the quality. And certainly the numbers, what we see, and this is a big challenge. Right. And we also provide here help in regards of production consulting, all different kind of things to help our customers here to start up, to ramp up actually in a very fast way.
Right, right. Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, had an interview earlier this morning with Dave Bergman from IPC, and they're actually starting a consulting arm as well to help people integrate the CFX because there is that requirement out there. One of the things you mentioned, or we mentioned just off stage before we started, was the business about machines being able to interpret the language from the different machines. And you mentioned, Michael, that CFX actually automatically conforms or comports the data. Can you talk about that a little bit, please?
Yeah, it's the unique feature that was part of the CFX conception right from the start. All of the other standards that we see, in some way or another, they are really moving data from one place to another. And then it's up to some middleware somewhere to understand, read the dictionaries, or try to interpret the data. It means there's a lot of software customization for every single deployment and delays then on actually getting the system up and running. CFX sought to completely avoid that, to eliminate any need for that kind of middleware, so that solution providers like ourselves, we can just get the data, we know exactly what it means, it's completely consistent and detailed from all of the different machine vendors, and we can start to make solutions. Now, of course, from the best machine vendors in the world, they are also able to get data from all of the other machines on their line, from other lines. They're able to see information about the factory, for example, the work orders, the material information coming in. And so every machine vendor, every solution provider, we now have completely interoperable systems. And that is only available when the data itself is completely standardized. Right. That's the unique point that CFX brings that no other standard brings.
Really, you work with a range of different CEMs, etc. Are you finding that some of them are staying pretty loyal to their old software systems and trying to adapt, or are they looking at moving to a standard CFX platform like that?
It's quite a range because some of the softwares are specific to the plants, the facilities themselves, right? Each one might have their own MES, and that's a more difficult thing to transition from and a longer project. But we do see generally a want and interest to have IPC CFX and have standards, but one of the bigger issues comes in when you're talking about legacy equipment and how do you work with that, because it comes from a different budget. How do you and like you said, the main use cases and ROI comes from all you getting data from all your machines and all your entire factory floor. So having gaps there highly reduces the ROI that you can get. So that's an area that we've focused a lot on and be able to retrofit equipment and get data out.
So, I mean, it's actually one of the biggest bottlenecks, I think, Gunther, is the legacy equipment that's in these factories when you go into them. How do you deal with that? You use middleware to comport the information, or how do you deal with it?
That's exactly the point. When we discussed now, we have to look into that from the top-down approach, which means from all the way down. That's the one way, and then from bottom up. And just as an example, our machines produce in an hour 500 gigabyte data. So you need domain know-how to work with this data. So how does somebody who comes now from top down is able to really filter out these data, what you need to run your process on the right quality level? So that's the reason why we need to work with our partners for the whole SMT process on a standardization and a communication platform where you basically then take this data, what you need and process it. Just imagine if we would run up, just as an example, in a cloud system, 500 gigabyte of data every hour,
Yeah.
then, and it's just one machines, yeah. So these kind of things we have to work on, and this will be done by edging systems or other ways to actually filter first the data what you're going to bring up into higher level systems.
Right.
And these two approaches we actually need to work on.
To work on. Okay.
I'd like to come back to your point because it's really, really critical. Companies like ASM, always on the forefront of technology, always ready to be the first there to deliver solutions for customers, all the know-how built into the machines. It's great for people buying new machines. But then you have the next level where you have machines that are already in place. Maybe they've been there 5 years. Can CFX work on those? Now, one company in particular, Heller, came out and said that basically every machine that they've ever made is going to be retrofitted with CFX.
Right.
So that's a great example for the industry because CFX is really simple. We had a machine vendor, Nordson, they actually implemented CFX within 3 hours in their machine. So as you go back through the layers of machines, the machines that are a little bit older are actually simpler, and actually it makes it very easy for the machine vendor to natively support CFX. And this then makes those on a par with the latest machines that you get. Okay, you don't get the intelligence of the latest machine, but you do get that connection. There is then the third tier, where machines are in existence that have never seen a computer before. They were created in a mechanical process almost. There are companies who are making interfaces for those. One particular example is Seika. They have a little white box, like a shoebox, they call it. A little Raspberry Pi computer with a digital I/O. Okay, you can buy it from somebody, but a manufacturer could also make such hardware. And you just simply put a CFX client inside the box. It takes 3 hours to do that, and then you hook the sensors and switches and relays and things up to monitor the signals of the machines. It's not elegant, but it does mean that you can integrate any machine into the factory. And even machines that manufacturers have of their own, the bespoke machines for functional test. Again, LabVIEW directly supports CFX. And so there is really no excuse for anybody not to be able to put CFX into their machines.
I can understand the middleware. I mean, that makes perfect sense. But I mean, the Heller example that you gave of them making it, all their legacy equipment, or making it backwards compatible, is commercially, is that really in their interest? I mean, because they want to sell new machines, surely. I mean, well, let's ask a machine vendor that. Are you going to retrofit all your legacy equipment, your older models, and make them CFX compliant?
Depends on, because with our OIB we are already working with the CFX, so we can do that, and this is also backwards compatible because we have OIB since 10 years. We didn't have the standard yet in general, but that's what we basically then adapted now. So there is a possibility. The question is, how deep can you go in certain kind of process data and certain kind of quality data? And this is then finally the decision of the customer. But it's not always necessary to have the full-blown picture. I guess we always have to look into investment protection. I don't believe that somebody is just buying new equipment just because of if the equipment is just because of the interface. Yes.
But I mean, this is it. I mean, you can only take out the data that's there. I mean, as you said, there's all sorts of different equipment going back to mechanical machines.
The data is there, and even the older machines, they are able to make that kind of data. But have a think about the business model here, because 2 years ago, I went around Germany talking to smaller machine vendors, and they have on average 30 different interfaces for data for their various customers. The cost of the maintenance of those interfaces and propagating each interface onto every next generation of machine is crippling. This is not their core business. Their core business is to create intelligent machines, not to deal with the outside world. So it actually makes sense for them to roll back CFX. They've got one interface. Once it's developed, they never need to develop an interface ever again. Plus, through CFX, they get a connection to all the other machines in the line. They can start to use their software guys to develop artificial intelligence-based algorithms together with other machine vendors, and they've got a whole new revenue stream. So they're satisfying the customer. They're keeping all of their equipment to add value, not only to the customer, but also to themselves.
That makes sense. Really? How do you approach this?
I was just going to make a point of, you mentioned about, legacy equipment, you only being able to get data out that's already there. But the truth is, these machines are working, right? They might not have, data portals or ways to get data, but it does have it there. So we have done in some cases where we went down to the ones and zeros, be able to extract the data that was useful and needed for the applications that were there. So I think it is important to remind ourselves that these machines are there. It might not be the direct way of getting all the data that you want for this particular application, but there are ways that are, not crazy expensive, very reasonable and sustainable to be able to do and implement as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Good, good. Okay. So moving on to the migration of factories leaving China and going into new markets opening, like India, for example, and even South Africa. There seems to be quite a number of Chinese suppliers of equipment following that route as well. And so where it used to be that everybody used only Western equipment for manufacturing, any serious manufacturer, I'm saying, it looks like the Chinese companies are becoming much more acceptable in these new markets. Are you running up against that?
Yes, we do.
You do.
And we have to be competitive. So that means our competition is certainly not always like out of pricing, but what we can do is, because from my personal point of view and also from our point of view, our customers have an interest to be high quality, have finally the highest productivity, so that means lowest cost and the highest flexibility.
Right.
And that's what we innovate in. And these kind of things, it's not just that you have a single box which is doing these kind of placement speed, or for example, it's also how you integrate that all together in a factory and how much you utilize your equipment in the overall way. And that's what we are shooting for, and that's the reason why we not just look for the box-to-box comparison, what mainly our Chinese competition is doing. We are looking for the whole picture and say, how can we utilize the line in a better way, how we can utilize the factory in a better way.
Right. Of course, you're more involved in the high reliability, high volume market. But I mean, I would imagine a lot of these Chinese vendors are going more into the consumer level. That's going into these countries. Do you have any experience of this?
Yeah. The thing is that it's not a case of one tool fits all. There is a space in the market for these different machines. An interesting point that you mentioned earlier was the know-how and the skill that's needed to run the machines and understand manufacturing.
Yeah.
A lot of that today, for example, when you buy an ASM machine, it's actually built into the machine. You've got years and years and years of accumulated know-how and experience that's built into the machine, so the operators actually don't really need to do so much. They just turn the machine on and it works. When you go to the other end of the scale, the old kind of technologies and know-hows that people need to run the machines are still there.
Right.
And so sometimes there are environments in which that's fine. It's the cheap and cheerful approach, and you have the right people with the right skills at the right time, and they're able to make things work in a very nice way. That's fine. I wouldn't say one is any more correct than the other. Both options exist in the market. It simply depends on how you want to run manufacturing. And from our perspective, we do see that people want to de-skill manufacturing. They want to have operators who are not specialists in various things. They want a flexible environment. They want a smart environment. They want to use the data to augment their brain power, to help them make the decisions, and whether it's engineering or supply chain or materials, doesn't matter. But that's what the data's there for. It's to help. And so the smarter the machine you get, the more data value you get, and the more assistance you get to creating that automated operation without dependency on human skill.
Right. And does that apply across, like, globally, in the Indian market as well as in the European and the US market?
Yeah, we here in the U.S. especially, there's so many conversations about shortage of skilled labor, right? And definitely manufacturers are thinking, how can we make it work here, right? Because if what was before you could have in China is also a problem where you'd be able to get a manager for each line. Now there's one manager for maybe 3-4 lines. You can use technology, you can use other ways to be able to still make that work.
Okay, okay. All right, well, we're coming up towards the end of this session, and as we have one of our principal German manufacturers here, I'm going to ask him a question about Brexit.
The most beloved question.
And, well, you know, let's be honest, the automotive sector globally at the moment is back a little bit. I think that's just a temporary situation, but you know, the UK market is a relatively big market for German cars. What do you think the strategies are going to be from these manufacturers if Brexit comes to pass?
For us, actually having a facility in Weymouth, United in the UK, we basically already are prepared since 2 years.
Right.
So we will see when the Brexit really comes, because we have been now preparing ourselves 3 times, and everything was in order already. Cost us a lot of money, and we are so flexible that we can produce in the UK and also in Malaysia. But this was not driven out of the situation from the Brexit. It was mainly driven that we want to serve the markets close to the markets.
Right.
That's the major interest. The Brexit to us doesn't have so much impact because the overall electronics industry in the UK is, I would say, moderate. Yeah?
It's small, but it comprises a lot of small companies that are startups that are doing some fairly innovative stuff, but a lot of them. I mean, you're close to that market as well, Michael.
Yeah, the real issue is the not really knowing what impact Brexit will have, or even if Brexit will happen. I mean, there are still people who are holding out. And it's that uncertainty which is driving a lot of the issues. But, you know, as we said, the preparation, a lot of companies have really taken the opportunity to look at their business profile, to make the preparations. And it's not just about Brexit, it's about being prepared for changes in the market that we're seeing for a whole range of reasons.
Right.
So I think the savvy companies will take the lead, take the opportunity, and they will come out on top. Yeah. And others will follow, and they will maybe pay a little bit of a price for doing so.
Yeah.
But, you know, they will see an advantage into not having to face expensive preparations. Maybe they are, you know, basing it on it's going to be cheaper to react at the time. But I don't know that that's going to be a good approach.
Yeah. Well,
so
you know,
we shall see.
It's a bit of a mess, so we'll wait and see what happens with it. But we're running out of time right now, unfortunately. So I really want to thank our panelists, Michael Ford from Aegis, Riti Catalan from Art Systems, and of course Gunther Schindler from ASM Assembly Systems. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and thank you for joining us today.